West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. À fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, l'âge tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
Judge Chutkan has gagged Donald Trump once again. You heard it again, folks. Judge Chutkan ruled just hours after Donald Trump completed the final brief in the case, his reply brief, which was filed on Saturday. And by Sunday night, without a hearing, we have the order of Judge Chutkan. Judge Chutkan has ruled that she is reimposing the original gag order that she placed on Donald Trump on the 17th of October, and that she is therefore not going to continue the stay of the gag order, which she had administratively imposed for a short period of time to let the parties be heard about whether the stay should stay in place, and the gag lifted all the way through Donald Trump's appeal of the issue at the D.C. Court of Appeals. But now, having read the briefs and read Donald Trump's arguments, the judge is like, well, we're going back to the gag order now. Now, let me remind everybody where we're at, and then I'll give you as much information as we presently have about the new order. We know that it's in place, and I'll try to give you my best guesstimate as to the contours of it. 17th of October, after full briefing and a 2-hour hearing in front of Judge Chutkan, Judge Chutkan issued her opinion and order, which we refer to colloquially as the gag order. And what she said was the following, and then I'll talk about why she stayed that order and why she is lifting the stay and reimposing the gag order now. All on this hot take. Just bear with me. I assure you we will get through it in due course. On the 17th of October, the Judge Chutkan wrote as follows on page 1. Under binding Supreme Court precedent, this court must take such steps by rule and regulation that will protect its processes from prejudicial outside interference. The First Amendment, the court goes on, does not override that obligation. Freedom of discussion should not be given the widest range compatible with the essential requirement of the fair and orderly administration of justice, but it must not be allowed to divert the trial from the very purpose of a court system to adjudicate controversies, both criminal and civil, in the calmness and solemnity of the courtroom according to legal procedures. For instance, on several occasions, this court has approved restriction on the communication of trial participants where necessary to ensure a fair trial for a criminal defendant. The court went on to analyze U.S. Supreme Court precedent and the alleged conduct of Donald Trump, including his attacking individuals involved in the judicial process, including, in her words, potential witnesses, prosecutors, and court staff, and his publicly targeting for harassment and other intimidating effects during the pretrial and trial stages of this particular case. And so the court entered the following as her gag order. This is the actual part of the ruling that's the gag order. It has ordered all interested parties in this matter, both sides, including the parties and their counsel, are prohibited from making any public statements or directing others to make any public statements that target 1. the special counsel prosecuting this case or his staff, 2. defense counsel or their staff, 3. any of this court's staff or other supporting personnel, or 4. any reasonably foreseeable witness or the substance of their testimony. And then she clarified it with a to clarify, if you will, commentary about her own order. She said, "This order shall not be construed to prohibit defendant Trump from making statements criticizing the government generally, including the current administration of the Department of Justice, statements asserting the defendant is innocent of the charges against him, or that his prosecution is politically motivated, or statements criticizing the campaign platforms or policies of defendant's current political rivals." So she gave a for avoidance of doubt so that he understands. And Donald Trump, since the 17th of October, has gone right along campaigning and attacking whoever he could that's not related to this order with his base. That's obvious. And so the briefing that went on happened because Donald Trump asked last week for the judge to do a temporary stay of her order and lift it so it wouldn't be binding on Trump, to allow Donald Trump to appeal it to the D.C. Court of Appeals, which he'll do. You have 2 places to get your stay if you want to get your gag order or your order lifted. 1, you ask the trial judge to do it. Failing that, you ask the appellate court to do it. And there'll be an administrative judge of the appellate court who will decide whether there should be a stay or not, pending the full adjudication of the issue with the merits panel, the 3-judge merits panel of the court. So he went properly this time, Trump, to Judge Chutkan and said, "Won't you please lift your gag order for now while I take the appeal?" And the judge, because she's very sober and she's very reasonable, she said, "I think this is an issue that needs full briefing. So for now, I am going to temporarily, administratively stay my order for this short amount of time, like a week and a half. And I want full briefing. And I want the government, the Department of Justice, Jack Smith, to file his brief this past Wednesday," which he did. "And I want Trump to file his brief by Saturday night," and he did late on Saturday, but he got it in on Saturday night. And we know how fast and the velocity at which Judge Chutkan makes her rulings. She makes her rulings quickly. I even predicted on Legal AF, our podcast, that she'd be ruling probably without a oral argument. And so that was Saturday night, full brief. Now it's fully briefed. Federal judges generally make rulings without oral argument. They don't need a hearing. They already had a two-hour hearing last time, and nothing really changed except in the papers that were filed by the Department of Justice on Wednesday. They were up to the minute. They were outlining for the judge all the places where Donald Trump has continued to attack people violently since she lifted her gag order, right? Including his attack on Mark Meadows, who's now been identified as a key witness for Jack Smith. And he virulently attacked Mark Meadows. And then all the other people who are scared of Donald Trump and his free speech, including the 60 Minutes Australia piece, which we ran on the Midas Touch and Legal AF networks here, about Anthony Pratt, the billionaire like Trump of Australia, who was secretly recorded and said Donald Trump operates like a mobster. And so they were putting in real-time things that had just happened that day, like Donald Trump violating the gag order for the second time in New York in the hallway that Wednesday, ended up in the Department of Justice's papers that Wednesday when it was filed. That's how up to the minute it was. And then the opposition, or the reply paper that got filed by Donald Trump late last night, which we have a copy of, was really not a reply paper. A reply paper is supposed to be what it sounds like. You reply point by point to the arguments raised by the Department of Justice, and you cite to them on page blank of the motion or the order or whatever you're responding to, and you refute them. What you're not allowed to do is regurgitate what you did in your opening brief, which is exactly what Donald Trump did. Here's the argument Donald Trump told the judge as getting the last word in the motion practice. He said, "Everything I say right now, because I am the leading candidate for the presidency," his words, not mine, is core political campaign speech that cannot be restricted any way, shape, or form. That's their argument. The argument is because he is currently a candidate, through a feat of alchemy, it converts everything that comes out of his mouth into core protected First Amendment speech that knows no limits and knows no boundaries and can't be restrained, even though there's this thing called the criminal justice system and the other branch of government laying right next to it. He's saying you can never map a gag order onto me because I am the candidate. This is what Donald Trump always believed when he decided to run for office, that it would somehow put the kibosh on all of these prosecutions against him. And so, but that's not the case law. And the judge had already, in her order, had already cited case law that stood for the proposition that there are two rights under the Constitution that are in conflict here and have to be reconciled. The First Amendment right of somebody in core political speech, yes, but the Sixth Amendment right to have a fair trial, a fair and impartial trial, and the administration of justice, and not having that system overturned, if you will, or attacked or pressurized by the person who's the defendant, is important as well. It's an important principle of our system of government. And so there's plenty of cases that say that there is a threshold across which you cannot cross if you are using your First Amendment rights, because it interferes with the fair adjudication or fair administration of justice. And that's what this Judge Chutkan has said time and time again. His First Amendment rights running for office don't matter to me, except up to the limits of what he's allowed to do without interfering with the proper administration of justice, which is my job. She keeps reminding Donald Trump, because he keeps forgetting, and his lawyers, that Donald Trump and his liberty is at her discretion. And it is in her hands, that he is an indicted 4-time felon in the federal court system in front of her. And therefore, his freedom is being administered by the criminal justice system. And so there are limits of what he can say outside the courtroom. And it's clear, as the papers for the government, the Department of Justice, laid out, it hasn't inhibited him at all in his ability to campaign. He wants to attack the Department of Justice, great. Joe Biden controlling the Department of Justice, have at it. Judge Chutkan kind of generally, without violent rhetoric against her or racial attacks, maybe. He can do all of that. He can say he's innocent, but he can't attack and target witnesses like Bill Barr. We'll put up something here. He's already in violation of the gag order as of the time that it hit the docket today. The judge just hit the docket again with this, and we're waiting for the full order. What we have for right now, that I can read to you, is what's called the docket entry, which alerts lawyers and people that follow things like this that there is an opinion and an order coming, but she wanted it clear that it was on the docket. And it was docketed at 7:05 p.m. Eastern Time today on Sunday night. It says opinion and order as to Donald J. Trump denying defendants a motion to stay pending appeal and lifting the administrative stay imposed by the court's October 20th, 2023 minute order signed by Judge Tanya S. Chutkan. We're still waiting to get our hands on the actual order to see what she wrote, because I'll be frank, the electronic docket crashed. This order, or other things like it, broke the internet, at least the court internet, and we're not able to get our hands on it. We will, I promise you. But we already can pretty well guess 32 years of trial experience in courtrooms just like this one. Legal AF, our leading podcast, we do this all the time. So we are not shocked by the result here. We would have been shocked had Judge Chutkan, based on all of the briefing in front of her, this ridiculous argument that by Donald Trump that everything and anything he says is core political speech that can't be regulated in any way whatsoever. I mean, that's the same approach he took to the trying to overturn our election system and our electoral system. He's trying to flip the apple cart on our court system and our judicial system, and that he's not allowed to do. The other thing they had argued is that the gag order, which I read to you, is very, very simple, in plain English and easy to understand, was actually incomprehensible and overbroad and vague. They couldn't figure out what it meant. They said they don't know what some of these words mean, Judge. Some of the words were like, we don't know what rhetoric is, and we don't know what violent is, and we don't know what target means. I mean, it was really silly. And I think the judge was waiting to see, all right, maybe they'll grow a brain between their first filing and they get the last word here on the Trump side. Nope, they didn't. It's the exact same regurgitation of what they wrote the first time around. And so she is now confident that there is a full record that can go now up to appeal to her bosses at the D.C. Court of Appeals. She's appealed, but she's frequently upheld. She's a well-respected trial judge. Probably will be on the D.C. Court of Appeals one day, especially if Biden has his way. Could be on the U.S. Supreme Court one day. She's that well respected. And so she's basically said to Donald Trump, have at it. You got a full briefing now. You got my order, 2 orders, you got 3 briefs, full record. Take that up to the appellate court. So they now, this is very key, rather than it being completely sua sponte, meaning at the appellate court level, they're making their own decision based on, some record in front of them and some briefing schedule. They now have a set of briefs in front of them, and they have to use what's called an abuse of discretion standard, which is to the judge's advantage here, because it is very hard to overturn things that are an abuse of discretion. And even though the other side will argue for a heightened standard to evaluate her order, I don't think there's any other way to read this based on now the full record, is that the appellate court is going to have to decide whether there was an abuse of discretion, which is a very low threshold. In other words, judges are given tremendous amount of discretion at the trial court level to make decisions, and to overturn that, you have to show what's called an abuse of their discretion, which is very difficult for Donald Trump to make out. So this again is another way that Chutkan cornered Donald Trump, made him brief the issue here in the trial court level, and then he can't start all over again with new briefing or new issues. It's now going to be them evaluating the stay and whether the stay should be lifted or not. Another brilliant position by Judge Chutkan, and then of course the Department of Justice worked right with it. We'll get the actual order. I expect the internet will log back on later tonight or early tomorrow. We're looking for it. We're refreshing all the time, trying to get our hands on it. But the docket entry told us everything we need to know. Donald Trump has lost. He's lost his bid to have his gag order lifted. He's already in violation of his gag order, having gone after, for instance, Bill Barr. He's going to have to sit down with his lawyers and understand as of 7 o'clock tonight what he can and can't do. Because if he violates it again and crosses that line in the sand, this judge is going to bring him in for a contempt hearing and require that he be there and be under oath. And then she's going to go from there. It may start at a fine, but this will very rapidly go to jail time. Now, John Lauro, the lawyer for Donald Trump, has let it be known that he doesn't think that the judge will ever really impose the gag order on Donald Trump, and nor will she put him in jail. I got news for John Lauro. I don't know what game you think you're playing with a federal judge, but I would not play that game. This is even Judge Engoron in a civil context in New York is progressively moving you towards potentially finding you in contempt and perhaps putting him in jail. And then it'll have to go up on an appellate process. I would not play with a federal judge, not one who's now reimposed the gag order after listening to the full briefing, who has the support and often is affirmed by her bosses at the Court of Appeals. I would not play with that at all. But we'll see what John Lauro and Donald Trump do. They like to test the limits of things. I got impeached, but will I get convicted? I led an insurrection, but will I be, banned from a ballot on a certain state? I mean, he's constantly pushing and testing and probing to find the limits of what the system will allow him to do.
It is Monday, the 30th of October of 2023, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner, the English bulldog, is our snoozing sous chef. Precious, the little Yorkie, is our door girl, and she will be seating you directly for our especially special daily special, River City Hash Mondays. Oh my, what a weekend, huh? Well, looks like, and we'll be speaking about this at the chef's table later on, but if we're not careful, pogroms will be popping up all over the world, including here in the great United States of America. In fact, it might be happening already if we're not careful, in small, incremental ways, and then it's going to take off like wildfire, and it will not be nice. Nope. One thing that we should be aware of, or keep reminding ourselves, this anti-Jewish sentiment that seems to be spreading rapidly is Russian psyops. I wish that people could wrap their minds around this, because this is not by accident. And also, I should mention Steve Bannon in the midst of this. His group is tied into it as well. So we have now a speaker who is accusing the President of the United States of America, one Joe Biden, of covering up his business dealings with Hunter. What I want to know is, why is this guy covering up the money that he's been getting from Russian oligarchs, padding his campaign coffers and who knows God what else? Let us not forget, Trump got Russian help in 2016. That is not a fantasy. It's not a witch hunt. It is the fact. In fact, Mueller convicted a slew, over a dozen, 24 Russian agents who were involved in messing up our elections. And now they're at it again. Whenever I hear MAGA types complain, oh, it's Russia, Russia, Russia. Yeah, damn right. And you guys fell for it. Why is that? I posited the question of what came first. The knee-jerk anti-Semitism, egg, or the chicken shit brainwashing of knee-jerk anti-Semites to just, go full-blown pogrom. Let's crystal lock every Jew we can find. And then we got Elon Musk involved in the midst of this as well. Why is this guy getting government money? Let alone, he also gets a security clearance with his Starlink thing. Sounds to me like a Trojan horse. What's coming in? What's buried in the bowels of this thing? Jesus. Already getting so many Starlink satellites up there that is messing up our ability to study the stars. And that's not a joke. Astronomers are actually quite perturbed about this predicament. It's one thing to have satellites flying up there with all the other space junk, but Starlink in particular is highly reflective. Why is that? Is that by accident? Really? When we already know about reflective properties floating around in the upper atmosphere and beyond. Give me a break. Well, I guess we got into this predicament because we didn't consider the hearts of people. Yeah. This is a little incel Christo-fascist. And I got to tell you, this guy does have incel qualities. We still haven't really seen his wife recently in public. Why is that? Oh, she was tired from being on her knees praying all the time. What? Is this deliverance? You're going to pray, and you better pray good? I got to lock up my wife because if I don't cage her, she's going to leave. That's why I call this guy an incel. He's got incel thinking. Perturbed about other people's sex lives. I don't want this guy rooting around in anybody's closet, bedroom, or anywhere. Okay. You don't negotiate with Nazis. This guy is part of a cabal as well. He's going to go after Joe. Covering up business dealings. This guy wants to sever Israeli and Ukraine funding. Well, why? And people are going to say, oh, you're being hyperbolic by saying he's little Putin's handmaid. No, I'm not being hyperbolic. That is the fact. I've also posited for quite some time the reason that our law enforcement can't really go after these electeds is because every single Republican has taken laundered Russian money either through the NRA or through sweetheart deals of Russian oligarchs setting up businesses in their area with the promise of jobs. And also the promise of, you keep giving us what we want, we keep filling up your pockets with all this laundered money. So I think there's like a secret OLC memo that says that you can't go after a whole political party for being cahoots with a hostile foreign power to overthrow the United States of America, because then that would make us a one-party rule. And that would be the Democratic Party, and we can't have that. So we just got to throw our whole United States of America and representative democracy out the window and give it to Vlad, because heaven knows what would happen if we gave it to the Democrats. We know exactly what would happen. We'd be kicking Nazi ass. We'd be kicking Russian Vladimir Putin bullshit. We tell Erdogan, you don't want to be a part of NATO? Fine. You'll suffer the consequences, won't you? They'll toe the line. Going after Joe because he's brokering all of these fantastic deals around the world, trying to keep it from blowing up, because that goes against the mission statement these people were given by, I like to think Vlad, but maybe Xi's involved too. Of course, Xi's involved. They think they're going to make a bunch of money in the emerging market of China. Emerging. Oh my. I best not dally too much in this rant, since we had quite a big lead up there, quite a long lead up there at the top, because I just thought it was important that, since it was such an emergency order by Judge Shunkin overnight, to reimpose that gag order. I just thought that was important to get in. And I was able to get that in pretty late last night. What the hell was I doing up so late? I don't know. But so why don't we give you a rundown on what we have in store for you and the rest of the show here at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Well, as we begin in the Bistro Cafe, boys graduate from high school at lower rates than girls with lifelong repercussions. Yeah, some of them might. Well, we'll get into the article. Most of the voters in Mississippi will have no choice about who represents them in the legislature. And that's a feature, not a bug. And California's commercial Dungeness crab season is delayed for the 6th year in a row to protect humpback whales. No, that's a good thing. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where Israel is reassessing its diplomatic relations with Turkey due to Erdogan's increasingly harsh remarks. And as I mentioned earlier, reminiscent of the start of the 1905 Odessa pogrom. A mob of almost 1,000 people shouting anti-Semitic slogans stormed a Russian airport looking for genocidal Jews arriving from Tel Aviv. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. To the right of the page is the chat room link monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. Across the page to the left from that chat room link near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com is the link to our Patreon page. And if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, it would really help. I'll give you more about that tomorrow since we had such a long lead in today. So if you could help us, it would be really helpful. So thank you. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, Mastodon, Spoutable, Blue Sky, wherever, you can do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that. Thank you, Tom. Follow me on Twitter, Mastodon, Spoutable, Blue Sky, Tumblr, Instagram, Facebook, wherever. You can find me most everywhere at Justice Putnam or just Justice Putnam. You figure it out. Anyway, I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Codes 10 minutes before showtime, and you can find that quite easily if you follow my social media feeds since the links are all there. If you would like to follow the show on Twitter, do so at Cookbook West and pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, And pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, wherever podcasts can be found. You'll just never find them on Stitcher anymore. You just won't. Alrighty. Carolyn Thompson of the Associated Press brings us this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. They attend the same classes with access to the same programs and even come from the same families. But girls consistently are outperforming boys, graduating at higher rates at public high schools around the country. No wonder all these people want to close down public schools. The girls are getting too educated. Well, maybe that's one reason. The gap between them is wide, often as wide as the achievement gap between students from affluent and low-income families. A problem that officials have tracked closely for years, but the reasons why boys are falling short are not as clear. Really now, I have some ideas. Interviews with students, educators, and researchers point to several factors. Men generally can earn the same wages as women with less education. Oh, you mean average white guys can do anything they want? Apparently. But boys also are more likely to face suspensions or other discipline, knocking them off track. And they don't pursue help as often when they face mental health challenges. Oh, my. Some boys are fine when they first drop out, landing jobs, providing steady incomes. But over the long term, lacking a high school degree can hold men back. Studies show young men who drop out of high school earn less over their lifetimes and are more likely to end up in jail. We'll blame it on the doors. Blame it on the school doors. Brian West was halfway through high school in Pascagoula, Mississippi when he dropped out in 2020. Instead of learning algebra and other things he couldn't imagine ever needing, he felt his time was better spent working at Popeyes and on landscaping crews to help his mother with the bills. I felt like it was pointless, he said. Yeah, every kid does. West, 18, planned instead to earn his GED, which he received 3 years later in September. It was just another way that I wanted to do it, he said. In some cases, boys like West are not in as much of a hurry to graduate as girls because they haven't needed a high school degree to cover rent and groceries, said Beth Jaros, a program director at research organization PRB. A man without a high school diploma often earns as much as a woman who has completed a year or two of college, Jaros said. Now, the U.S. government does not require states to report graduating data by gender the way they must break it out by racial and ethnic groups and for children with disabilities, as well as English language learners and homeless students. But in every state reporting high school graduation rates by gender, research shows female students graduate at higher rates. I would say women. More than 45,000 fewer boys than girls graduated high school in 2018, according to an estimate by researcher Richard Reeves, based on data available from 37 reporting states. That year, about 88% of girls graduated on time, compared with 82% of boys, according to Reeves, who this year left the Brookings Institution to launch the American Institute for Boys and Men. The gap was still 6 percentage points in 2021, according to a follow-up analysis this year. The gender gap has gone largely unaddressed by schools, but some have found effective strategies. The city of Yonkers, New York, raised graduation rates for boys of color through support such as mentoring. Former Superintendent Edwin Guazeta said addressing the racial gap in graduation rates was useful toward understanding the overall gender gap, which was 7 percentage points in 2022. Boys are referred to special education at higher rates than girls in early grades and are suspended at higher rates throughout school, all of which can derail plans for an on-time graduation, Guazeta said. When the decks are stacked differently for young men than they are for young ladies, why should we expect different outcomes, asked Guazeta, who retired from the district in July. David A. Lieb and Emily Waxter Pettis of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, River City Hash Mondays. After being in office for over a decade, Mississippi State Senator Dean Kirby got challenged in the Republican primary. He won with 70% of the vote. That was in 2003. And it remains the last time Kirby faced an opponent. The longtime Jackson area senator is on the ballot again this year without either a Democratic or Republican challenger. While the length of Kirby's uncontested streak is unusual, his situation is not. More than 4/5 of Mississippi's legislative candidates will have no major party opposition in the November 7th general election, and more than half of this year's winners will have faced no other Republicans or Democrats in either the primary or the general election. I think people are happy with the state and the way things are, Kirby, Mississippi Senate President Pro Tem said in explaining the lack of challengers. Though Mississippi represents an extreme example, it highlights a national decline in competition for state legislative seats. New research suggests the reasons are more complex than mere voter satisfaction with incumbents. It also raises questions about the ability of American voters to hold their elected representatives accountable. In some states, there's so many uncontested seats that one party wins the chamber before an election takes place, said Stephen Rogers, a political scientist at St. Louis University who focuses on state legislatures. A democracy relies on the notion that the people will have some sort of choice, Rogers added, but without someone running for office, there really isn't a choice. In Mississippi, the percentage of legislative seats with no major party opposition in the general election has risen steadily from 63% in 2011 to 85% this year. The percentage with no Republican or Democratic challengers in either the primary or the general election has grown from 45 to 57% over that same time, according to data compiled by the AP, or for the AP by Ballotpedia, a nonprofit organization that tracks elections. Rogers' research found that legislative competition around the U.S. has been dwindling for decades. Though contested elections were common in the 60s and 70s, about 35% of incumbent state lawmakers did not face either a primary or general election challenger from 1991 to 2020. And one major reason for this is political gerrymandering, a process by which those in power, Republicans, draw voting districts to give their party's candidates, a Republican, an unfair advantage. Desk of the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The start of the commercial Dungeness crab season in California has been delayed for the 6th year in a row to protect humpback whales from becoming entangled in trap and buoy lines. The State Department of Fish and Wildlife said commercial crabbing will be delayed until at least December 1st. The situation will be assessed on or before November 17th. It's the latest delay for the start of the commercial season, which traditionally begins in mid-November for waters between the Mendocino County line and the border with Mexico. The recreational take of Dungeness crab using traps will be temporarily restricted in some areas when the recreational season opens on November 4th, officials said. Recreational crabbers will be able to use other methods, including hoop nets and crab snares. The commercial crab industry is one of California's major fisheries, and the shellfish is especially popular around the holidays. Well, that brings us to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind A new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. This week, The Killing Moon. The term masterpiece is so overused that it's almost lost all meaning, but The Killers of the Flower Moon actually lives up to the word. Directed by master storyteller Martin Scorsese and based on the true crime bestseller, it stars Scorsese favorites Robert De Niro and Leonardo DiCaprio and transports you to the 1920s. It tells the true story of a string of murders involving the Osage people in Oklahoma who, after oil was discovered on their land, became the richest people per capita on Earth. Unlike the book, which is set up as a whodunit, the audience knows right away that William Hale, played by De Niro, and his nephew Ernest, DiCaprio's character, are behind the murders. The motive is getting their hands on native oil rights. Aware that the only way to do that is via blood or marriage, William enlists Ernest to marry into a target family and slowly arrange for the demise of each member with the intent of leaving Ernest as the heir. While the who, what, and why of William is established early, Ernest's motives are far more nuanced, and it's DiCaprio's performance, along with that of his on-screen wife Molly, played astonishingly by Lily Gladstone, that drives this one. In what's likely to become a multi-award-nominated performance, Gladstone portrays Molly as a realistic, intelligent woman who knows from the beginning that Ernest is more interested in her money than her. However, the relationship becomes increasingly complex, especially once the pair start a family. Add to this nuanced web spectacular cinematography and the incredible production design of Jack Fisk, and The Killers of the Flower Moon isn't just one of the best movies of the year, it may be one of the best movies ever made. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. Catch up with us at TakeTwoMovieReview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
You're listening to the American Democracy Minute, keeping your government by and for the people. 4 rules governing partisan poll challengers in Michigan's election official handbook will have to be removed or enacted through the legislature, according to a Michigan appeals court. Poll challengers are official political party representatives who observe the counting process in the secure area, unlike public poll observers who must watch from a designated viewing area. According to reporting by Michigan Live, the new rules in question were written into Michigan's official election rules manual for the May 2022 update. These included requiring state registration of poll challengers in advance when party credentials were previously used and challengers could be appointed on election day, limiting challengers to speaking only with the designated liaison, bans on cell phones in the absentee ballot counting area, and removal of challengers for repeated impermissible challenges, reasons other than the voter's eligibility or ballot deficiencies. After a poll challenger was removed for allegedly harassing Detroit election officials under the new rules, the Republican Party sued. The court found the state's rules had exceeded the Secretary of State's authority. Michigan's Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson appealed, but the higher court upheld most of the lower court's ruling. State officials must now reissue a corrected handbook, removing the new rules not specified in Michigan election law. We have an explanation of the role of poll observers at AmericanDemocracyMinute.org. I'm Brian Beal.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1929. On that Wednesday morning, people across the United States woke up to newspaper headlines informing them that something had gone horribly wrong on Wall Street the day before. Black Tuesday, as the day came to be known, had capped off a devastating drop in the market that had begun with the great crash the prior Thursday. $25 billion was lost in the crash, which would be about $300 billion trillion in today's money. The crash helped spark the Great Depression that saw unemployment soar to 25% and nearly half of the banks in the United States fail. But the day after the crash, the news reports were not all doom and gloom. While Variety declared in big bold letters, "Wall Street lays an egg," other headlines struck a different tone. The New York Times wordy headline stated, quote, "Stocks collapse in 16,410,000 30-share day, but rally at close cheers brokers. Bankers optimistic to continue aid." The Chicago Tribune went with the more concise, "Stock slump ends in rally." Newspaper reporters attempted to explain the crash. The Denver Post blamed the downturn on gamblers. The Philadelphia Evening Ledger blamed the propagandists of gloom and economic terror. And the New York Times blamed the reckless Wall Street speculators. But many papers also attempted to quell panic over the bad news from New York. The Kansas City Star assured readers that once the adjustment is completed, the country will move forward to new levels of prosperity. The Nashville Banner similarly predicted the reaction had to come, and the country will be better off for the lesson it has had. Costly though it be, that costly lesson became a devastating global depression.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, River City Hash Mondays. We always begin, whether from around the world, along the banks of the Rogue River, in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon, on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 28 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting a high of around 70 though. Foggy conditions currently will turn to mostly clouds later on, then sunshine for the afternoon. Winds light and variable. Partly cloudy skies overnight with lows in the mid to upper 30s. Oh, a warming trend. Winds light and variable, and then sunshine and clouds mixed tomorrow with highs once again near 70, winds light and variable. Pollen is rated as none here in the little village of Rogue River. The air quality index for the region is in the good range at 49 parts per million, and the daytime UV index is low at level 2. Barometric pressure is falling at 30.29 inches. Visibility is at 1.5 miles, and relative humidity is at 92%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world, and that is the Weather Underground. London is 58 degrees and cloudy. Paris is 53 degrees and cloudy. Rome is 80 degrees, sunny with wind, and they also have a wind advisory that could potentially disrupt critical infrastructure. Oh my. Bagram is 60 degrees and clear. Kyiv is 61 and fair. Beijing is 76 degrees and fair. Tokyo is 65 and mostly cloudy. Melbourne, Victoria, Australia is 51 and partly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 51 and fair. Chicago, Illinois is 38 degrees and sunny. And New York, New York is 58 degrees Fahrenheit and cloudy. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Staff at the World Desk of the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, River City Hash Mondays. Israel said on Saturday that it was recalling its diplomats from Turkey over increasingly harsh statements coming from the government in Ankara. The announcement came after Turkey's president told a massive crowd in Istanbul that his government was preparing to declare Israel a war criminal due to its actions in the Gaza Strip. Israel previously removed its diplomats out of Turkey for security reasons, but Israeli former Foreign Minister Eli Cohen said on Twitter, the platform formerly known as Twitter, that they were being ordered to pull out now for a reassessment of the ties between Turkey and Israel. Cohen's statement suggested a move that could sever the newly restored diplomatic ties between the two countries. There was no immediate response from the Turkish Foreign Ministry. Earlier on Saturday, Erdogan said during the pro-Palestinian rally that attracted hundreds of thousands of participants that his country planned to formally accuse Israel of committing war crimes in the Gaza Strip. His office would not comment on his statement, though. The chief prosecutor for the International Criminal Court has said an investigation opened in 2021 into alleged crimes in the Palestinian territories that could analyze war crime allegations from the current Israel-Hamas war. In his remarks at the Istanbul protest, Erdogan also held Western countries responsible for the more than 7,700 people the Hamas-led health ministry in Gaza said have been killed in the last 3 weeks. No word on the 1,400 massacred on 10/7.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Even more staff working the weekend World Desk brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Putin called a meeting of security and law enforcement officials today, the day after a mob stormed the airport in the southern region of Dagestan after a flight from Israel landed there. Almost 1,000 angry men, some carrying banners with anti-Semitic slogans, rushed onto the tarmac of the airport in Makhachkala, the capital of the predominantly Muslim region, last night, looking for Israeli passengers on the flight from Tel Aviv. More than 20 people were injured, with 2 in critical condition, that the Dagestan Health Ministry said. The injured included police officers and civilians. At least 60 people were detained in the unrest. It was not clear if charges were filed against any of them, but Russia's investigative committee said it opened a criminal probe on charges of organizing mass unrest. Russia has issued carefully calibrated criticism of both sides in the war between Israel and Hamas, a conflict that is giving Moscow new opportunities to advance its role as a global power broker and challenge Western efforts to isolate it over Ukraine. The crowd that rushed onto the tarmac last night surrounded the jet belonging to the Russian carrier Red Wings, with seemingly little resistance from the police. Mind you, this is a country where a woman, a lone woman, holding a blank piece of paper in the middle of a boulevard was tackled by over a dozen security personnel, and yet there were no police to be found when this mob began a pogrom. That brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here tomorrow for Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we will meet up here tomorrow, right here, in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. À fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goer. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.